Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another Fusion Friday. My name is Alex Alvarez, application engineer here at KETIV Technologies. So happy Friday, everyone. Hopefully, we've all been having a pretty productive week so far. Once again, thanks for tuning in. For today, we are going to be talking about some Fusion 360 tips to increase productivity. These are tips that I have gained throughout the years of using Fusion 360, as well as some updates that Autodesk has recently released for the Fusion 360 users. We are going to be having a mix of both maybe old topics that you have seen, or maybe some tips that you have dove into, and as well as some new tips that Autodesk has for the Fusion 360 users. So again, we're going to keep the intro short and sweet. Let's go ahead and just dive into the software and get it going. All right, so here we have Fusion 360. Again, if you guys are brand new users to the software, just a quick overview, right? So even if you are just a recent user of Fusion 360, notice that it looks slightly different than before, right? So now the tabs maybe changed a little bit in size. The user interface may look a little different. So if yours still looks the same way, or if it looks a little different than mine, you want to make sure that you do update your software. So the way you do that is if you go over here to your little, what looks like a clock, it's going to say job status. Go ahead and click on that, and it should tell you to restart the software. So just go ahead and restart it, and then you are going to be having the latest version of Fusion 360. All right, so again, if you guys are new to Fusion 360, this is the user interface. Whenever you want to switch between tabs, so again, keep in mind that Fusion 360 is going to have essentially an all-in-one package. So what that means for you is that you're going to have access to the modeling tools. If you want to do maybe generative design, a little bit of sheet metal, rendering, animation, right? So you can kind of see that it has all the different environments that you would need to take your product from the design space all the way to manufacturing, all within this exact same tool. Again, if you ever want to jump into, just hit the tab and then just select which workspace or which environment you want to essentially be in that scenario. If you click over here on the top left, this is what we call the data panel. This is where you're going to be storing all your projects, all your models, all your different parts, your assemblies, you name it. This is essentially, what's going to be holding all the different models or different projects that you're working with each individual customer. Now, the way I like to work inside of the projects is just by splitting it up by the specific customer that I'm working with. So if you take a look through here, some of these different projects, you can click on a project and you'll have all the data accessible to you, as well as this people's tab over here on the very top. What that means is that you can share all this data or this entire project with multiple people across your team, right? So again, eliminating the need to send data, to export files. Maybe you're not working on the latest version. Again, whoever has access to this project is going to have access to the latest version of your models. All right, as we work our way down here, everyone is going to have access to the samples folders, right? So I am going to be working with a few samples, models or sample assemblies. If you're interested in those, go into the CAM samples, and I am going to be working with this model down here, which is the gearbox complete. Again, if you want to take a look at it, or maybe you want to dive a little bit deeper into this model, just go ahead and click on that, and just kind of start exploring some of the options that Autodesk employees use to create this model. Again, you don't just have CAM samples, you have some training files that you can work off of. Maybe you want to see some design samples. You can also go ahead and dive into some of those examples that they provide. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into some of these tips. So the first one is going to be a keyboard shortcut, right? So we've all known that Al, if you hit Al on your keyboard, it's going to start a line command, right? C for circle, and so on and so forth. But what if you want to start customizing these hotkeys? If you hit a drop down for whichever one of these tabs, notice that you'll see these three little dots right next to the command, right? So even rectangle, see these three little dots, you can go ahead and click on those three dots, and it brings up this extra side menu over on the side. And we have that option now to go ahead and change keyboard shortcut. So we click on that. Notice that we now have the option to assign a new shortcut key to this specific command, right? So again, this is relatively new. I believe it's a few months that it's been released inside of the software. Again, before this, you were just kind of set in stone to whatever hotkey Autodesk had released for the software. But now, once again, you do have the option to kind of start customizing some of these commands, right? So that's a fairly nice tip. Again, if you aren't using that, take advantage of it. It can definitely speed up some of your workflows here. All right, so the next one is actually one of my favorites. So again, usually when you're working in an assembly, you can get sometimes lost in space, right? Or maybe your mouse wheel kind of scrolls out, and you're kind of lost in space, if you will. If you ever want to get back, just double click on your middle mouse wheel, and it automatically fits to this specific model, right? So again, zoom out, double click on the middle mouse wheel, and it automatically brings the model to view, right? So pretty nice tip. I definitely use that very, very often. Another actually interesting command is going to be the repeat last command. So let's say we want to do, a few fillets. You select your edges, so you create the fillet, but maybe you have a different fillet that, maybe it has a different size, or maybe it's in a different area. You can always right click, and then the very top command is always going to be repeat fillet. So if you get pretty handy with this tool, you can just right click and just go up, and it's automatically going to select it, right? So even if you just right click and drag up, it's automatically going to create that fillet command for you, right? So you don't even need to right click and release the right click. You can just do right click, drag up, and it's going to automatically bring up your last command. Okay, so this next one is going to be a little bit more of a surface modeling tip. So let's go back to a model here that we have. Again, I found this in the basic training sculpting samples. So in here, the model looks okay. It doesn't look too bad. What I want to share with you guys, though, is the ability to switch between views, right? So notice that this is box mode. They call it box mode. It converts all the T-splines into essentially this box shape, prismatic shapes that you can start seeing this a little bit more visible and start seeing where some of these problem areas are at, right? So if I go back, it doesn't look too bad. Now, if I go hit Alt-1 on my keyboard, notice that it starts showing some of these intersecting edges, right? Or intersecting lines that we have here. Again, if we click on Alt-3, doesn't look too bad. It looks all right. Alt-1, notice that it does show that, that the problematic areas. So how do we get rid of that? We right click, edit form, and zoom in here a little bit, and then drag this edge out. Right, so what you want to start doing here is start matching the edges here. So make sure that they're fairly even, that they're maybe collinear depending on your design. So now if I exit out of this, Alt-3, notice that looks much better here, right? So again, switching between box mode and your full-on T-spline view here. All right, so oftentimes we are rotating our model, right? So for the most part, Fusion 360 does pick up the center of the model, and it rotates it correctly as we would expect. Maybe what if, for whatever reason, maybe the orbit point shifted around. Maybe you want to shift around or orbit around a different point. The way you do that is you right click, set orbit center. Go ahead and click on that. It brings up the little point right next to my pointer. And let's say I want to rotate about the front there, right? Notice that now it's automatically going to rotate or pick up that point, and it's going to rotate the model about that point that I selected. Once again, right click, set orbit center. Let's say we want this point here. And now it picks up that point automatically for us. Okay, so that's an interesting tip. Let's go ahead and move on to some tips on the data panel over here on the left. Let's say that, for whatever reason, let's say we were going to be traveling, we wanted to work, we wanted to work on some models. Maybe we wanted to get ahead on some of the work that we have. Again, as you all know, Fusion 360 is a cloud-based software. So if you do want to save your models, for the most part, you do have to be connected some way or some form to the internet, right? But there are ways that you can save some of these files locally. And the way we call this, or what we call this, is saving it to your cache folder. So if I go over here, let's see, let's go to HSM tips and tricks. So notice that these models are all essentially able to be clicked on right now, right? So I can click on any one of these models, I can open it. Now, if I were to go to offline mode, which by the way, you can do that selecting this button here, right? So now we're essentially in offline mode. What offline mode means that it's not necessarily going to be able to save the most current version of this model, right? Well, what if we wanted to work on this 3D pencil model, and it can't be selected? Well, you kind of want to be cautious of this because you want to keep in mind, or you kind of want to do this before you actually lose some sort of connection to the internet. So if we go back to online mode, you can right click on the model and say add to offline cache. So give it a few seconds here. It completed. So now if I go back to the offline mode, now these two models are going to be able to get worked on, right? So again, you do want to be careful or cautious of how you're working with this. You can work in offline mode, but again, you want to keep in mind if you are going to be traveling and you haven't opened this model in quite some time, that you add it to the offline cache. If you are working with these models day in, day out, they're automatically going to be added to the offline cache. So again, there's no need or nothing on your part that you need to do. It's automatically going to add these files to the offline cache. We often get asked, well, where exactly is that cache folder? It is a little tricky there. Autodesk does give you a location on where to find it, or essentially the path on where to find it. If we go to our folders here, notice that this is going to be the path. It's going to start off in the C drive, by the way. So if we go to users, go to your name, you want to go ahead and enable the hidden folders, right? So again, this is going to be a hidden folder, app data. Click on that, local, Autodesk Fusion 360. Now for me, it doesn't give me my username for some reason. It gives me this long value. I clicked on unknown user, it didn't give me anything. So for you guys, it might be a little different. So go ahead and just click on either unknown user or the one that has either your username or this long value here. So it's going to be kind of depending on the user, I would assume. So once you click on that, it's going to be this w.login, and it's going to be this F folder here, right? So as soon as you open that, this is going to be your cache folder. Again, if for whatever reason, maybe you want to work off of one of these models, or maybe you want to send it to a customer, and you don't necessarily want to log into Fusion 360, this is where you're going to find all those cached files. Every 15 days, it does get cleared out, and depending on which models you open, so you want to keep that in mind, that if you haven't opened a file in 15 days, that you do either open it or add it to your offline cache. All right. So here's another pretty good one. Again, usually, and this happens to me a lot when I go do demos, when I'm working on multiple screens, sometimes the browsers or stuff gets shifted around. It's not necessarily as we would expect. If you want to get quickly back to how your original view layout was set up, go over here to the top, go to view, and then you have this reset to default layout option, right? So notice again, it does have a hotkey, Control Alt R, but if not, just go ahead and click on that, and it resets your layout to your original format. I noticed that this happens a lot in the CAM workspace or the manufacturing workspace a lot. Sometimes you can't see your setups or your tool paths. Customers start calling in and they're saying, well, we can't see our setup anymore. Did it get deleted? No, it didn't get deleted. It got just, the view is somehow just buggy a little bit. So just go ahead and try that first. So again, file, view, reset to default layout, right? Okay, so now let's go ahead and talk about a quick sketch tip here. So let's go ahead and start off with a quick circle here. And now let's go ahead and do a rectangle. Okay, so how would we essentially constrain this center point to the center of this line so that they're perfectly horizontal? And we have a few options here in our constraints, right? So we have midpoint, we have horizontal, vertical, but again, it doesn't really give us, something that we would want here. Maybe a lot of people would probably try creating a line, make that a construction line, and then maybe even do a point or select midpoint and select, this rectangle edge here and the line and make that a midpoint. There's actually a much easier way to do that. So let's go ahead and delete that. If you go ahead and click on horizontal, vertical, let's go ahead and click on that center point here. Now, again, what do we want? We want the center of this line here. And notice as we hover along the line, it doesn't really give us that famous little icon here, right? The triangle that's indicating the midpoint. If we hold Shift on our keyboard, take a look at that, right? So it gives us that midpoint of the line. Click on that, and it automatically constrains it to be horizontal, right? So again, that's one tip. You don't need to create a point. That's actually something that I did in the beginning. I was often finding myself creating points because it didn't pick up the midpoint there. You do have to hold down Shift in order to select that midpoint. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on here. Let's go ahead and add a few dimensions, right? So let's say we want that dimension there, that dimension there, this dimension there. Right, so again, this is a fairly simple model, right? It doesn't have a lot of dimensions. I work with customers who are actually designing shafts or drive shafts. So you would imagine how complicated some of those dimensions get, and how really clobbered it gets inside of your design workspace, right, or your model environment here. As of a few days ago, they did allow for the show dimensions to be turned on or turned off, right? So as soon as we click on this checkbox, it automatically hides all the dimensions. If you want to go ahead and see your dimensions, go ahead and show dimensions. I believe these two are new up here. I'm not too sure. But you do have the ability now to hide and show dimensions, right? Pretty neat tool. This is actually something that was brought up in the questions where the idea station, where you can submit ideas. If if maybe there's something that you think can speed up your process, go ahead and submit it to the idea station, and let Autodesk know exactly what you're trying to look for inside of the software. And I will show you guys at the end, by the way, how to get to the idea station. Okay, so another pretty big one actually is they added the option for NPT threads, right? So if we go ahead and make an extrude here, let's say we want a hole, which, by the way, this is also another nice tip here. The sketch toolbox, right? So by now you guys should all be somewhat familiar. If you're new, maybe you're not too familiar with this option. If you guys are AutoCAD users or are familiar with AutoCAD, it's very similar to how AutoCAD works. You start typing a command and it automatically picks it up for you, right? So again, you have to hit S on your keyboard first and then begin typing a command, right? So we want the whole command here. We want to start off on that face. Now notice that which, by the way, you can have the option to do a hole and do some sort of threaded hole in the same command here, right? So in this case, if we go to the very end here, we have a tapered tap. Go ahead and click on that. Scroll down and notice that we now have the option for the empty threads, right? This is actually something that also a lot of customers would bring up to me. There wasn't an easy way to do it, but again, now Autodesk has released this option where you can just automatically select the entity threads. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on here. All right, so now we're going to start talking a little bit about some CAM tips. This is actually something that not a lot of people do, and I find that it tends to either slow down their their setup process, or sometimes they just aren't too sure on how to go about it. The option that I'm talking about here is if you click on your name, go to preferences. This default modeling orientation, right? So for me, I have it set to Z up. If you guys are programming or are using Fusion 360 to machine parts, and for the most part, if you're doing vertical milling or using a VMC, you want to see the part exactly how how it's going to be set up inside of the machine. Now, again, typically for a VMC, you are going to be looking at the part straight down, and the axis that's going to be coming up and down, or if you look at it from the front, yeah, up and down, it's going to be the Z axis, right? You're going to be looking down at the X, Y plane. By default, Fusion 360 has this set to be the Y up, right? So again, what that means for you is that you have to do an extra click when you do the setup, and orient the WCS correctly to how you would have it in your machine. By having the Z up here, or by starting off with the default modeling orientation with the Z up, the WCS is automatically going to be correct. All you need to do is set a specific point on where you want that WCS to be located. So again, if you don't have this default modeling orientation set to Z up, I highly recommend that you do it. Or maybe you're doing turning, right? Or maybe you're doing some sort of lathe work and it doesn't make sense to have the Z up. Maybe the Y up is what you're looking for. So again, it kind of depends on what kind of work you find yourself doing. All right. So again, 2 more tips here, and these are actually going to probably be two of my favorite. If we take a look at this part, notice that we do have a few setups already here created. Let's go ahead and enable setup 1. Now, what I want to do here is, let's say I want to go ahead and machine this hole here, right, or the bore. I'm going to go ahead and use a 2D circular tool path in this case. Again, selecting my tool. Maybe I want to start off with a 1/4 inch flat end mill. Go to geometry. If I click on the face, it shows me the preview of the tool path. Now again, this part only has 2 bores that are the exact same diameter. So if we go ahead and click on select same diameter, notice that it automatically picks up that other bore, right? So again, I only have 2 bores here, so it's not really too difficult for me to go over here and click. But again, that just saves me an extra click that I have to do. Rotate the part. Maybe it was in a different location. Less mouse travel for me in this case. So very similar to how the drilling toolpath works, where it automatically picks up holes that are the same diameter, right? So you can keep that in mind. It works very similar to that, where you select a whole face, and then you click on select same diameter, and then it picks up the same diameter bore here. You do have a couple options if you want to limit that to be, holes or bores that are going to be only the same hole depth, same Z top height, or maybe you want to limit the tool path or the selection to be around some sort of containment boundary, right? So you do have a few options here. I definitely recommend to try this out, and start speeding up some of the programming process here. So let's go ahead and okay here. All right, so my last one is actually going to be one of my favorites. So if we go to setup, simulate, notice that the sock looks blue. So it may be a little bit different to what you're accustomed. By this point, I think everyone is either used to that, to having that green stock. Maybe they switch that to being material and set that to be, something that's a little bit easier on the eyes, or something that's easier for the user to see how the tool path is going to look. As of a couple days, you do have the option now to compare the stock to the actual model. So if we select comparison, go to the very end of the toolpath, notice that the entire model here is green. So green means good. Blue means that there's still material that needs to be removed, right? So again, this is our stock, this is our actual part. So that's why we're not too worried about this other material here. And then red means that you've actually gouged the part, right? So those are the three colors that are going to show up in this simulation. Let's go ahead and do a quick test run just to see how that works. So here we have a contour toolpath. Again, it looks like they use that as the finishing toolpath. So if we go to the passes, work our way down here, stock to leave. And let me go ahead and drag this up a little bit higher. So we don't want any radial stock to leave, but we do want some axial stock to leave, right? So everything else looks good here. Go ahead and click OK. And there we go. So the toolpath gets generated. If I go back to simulate, go back to the end of the toolpath, right? So again, we had a contour finishing toolpath on the top of this face, and before this, I had 0 stock to leave, right? So it was machining down to the face of the part. Now I left some stock, and the simulation is showing that there's going to be material left here to remove. Now I don't believe it tells you exactly how much material is left. So if we go to info, if we go to verification down here, right? So it does give you a value there. So if you guys look at the very bottom where it says distance, so it tells you that there's a distance of 0.01, right? So that's one way to do it. To be honest with you, I probably wouldn't rely too much on this because I have found it to kind of be off in some points, right? So right now it actually looks like it's picking up the entire surface and it's actually showing quite well. But there are certain models that I've worked with where it shows and it's always kind of deviating or bouncing up and down depending on the spot of the surface here. But again, nonetheless, a very handy tool. This is actually something that a lot of people have also been asking about and wanting to have incorporated into the software. And again, as of a couple of days, they have added the ability to compare your stock model with your actual model. So with that, that's gonna be all the tips that I have for today. Let's go over here back to our webinar. Again, if you guys have any questions around Fusion 360, Inventor HSM, or just really any Autodesk products that are out there, feel free to let us know, reach out to us. We are here to help. We have tons of these videos, by the way, so if this is your first webinar and you kind of like the style of what we do here, go to our YouTube channel, KETIV Technologies, AVA, and you are going to see a list of videos that we've created. You're going to see videos on Fusion 360, Inventor HSM, Autodesk Inventor. So just a huge variety of different topics that we've created throughout the years. So with that, let me see if there's any questions. Scott's asking if there's a way to dock the sketch menu or at least keep it open in order to reduce keystrokes similar to Inventor. A way to dock the sketch menu. I don't think there's a way right off the bat to automatically dock it. So if we go back to model, sketch, right? So yeah, there really isn't a way to dock this entire sketch menu. What I would recommend though, Scott, is if you find yourself using a certain command, if you hit the S key, notice that we have a few commands here already built in, right? So you can essentially make this or kind of add on to this sketch toolbox. The way you do that, I believe, is if you go to the, let's say we want an arc here. Click on that. So you can pencil toolbar, by the way, if you want it to show up here. But you can also, I believe, if you pencil shortcuts, notice that we now have the center point arc, right? So again, you would just hit S and then the center point arc is there. So that's actually one of my recommendations is if you find yourself using one of these commands fairly often, just hit S and then just pin it to your shortcuts and then just have it ready to go. right there. Okay, so with that, we'll give it a few more seconds for more questions. If there's any more questions, again, guys, if you know, maybe you're watching this on our YouTube channel, again, feel free to reach out if you have questions on what you saw today or just anything in Autodesk and, you know, products in general. We are going to be doing one again next month, I believe a few weeks from today. So be on the lookout for that. So with that, thanks guys for tuning in once again, and we'll see you on the next one.